Hello, in this video we will discuss about the diffusion and transport of ions in the cell and out of the cell as a extracellularly and intracellularly. So let's begin to understand from the initial concept. So here is I am drawing the person which that contain blood circulatory system contain extracellular fluid, for example as a solute, and also the water contain. Water is the solvent but the solute is ions and sugar molecule. So this is the tissue, which tissue is made up of cells, and cells contain a normally the potassium is high inside while the sodium will be less, and calcium also. So remember, here is the intracellular space and extracellular space. Intra mean inside. So here is the ion exchange through active transport is known as active transport through ATP usage, expenditure of ATP, and against the osmotic gradient this is. So that is why, for example, sodium potassium exchange during the nerve impulse. While here is the inside the extracellular fluid contain blood, which contain a water, ions, protein, and other things, which that will lead to homeostasis when the requirement for the cell for potassium, so the potassium can move inside the cell through a diffusion, for example. But this is the exchange. For example, sodium will move out while the potassium will be moving. That is known as the exchange, and this exchange is required energy that is known as the active transport, while the passive transport is known as diffusion. Remember, this diffusion is a passive transport type, but passive transport is the basically ion exchange, not against the osmotic gradients. Remember, so here is the cell which that's contain tissue, and this cell is basically plasma membrane, and this is the nucleus, and this nuclear membrane and inside the genetic material is known as DNA. Remember, this is the model of cell. So let's begin to understand from diffusion. Diffusion is a simple diffusion means that is the osmosis type part. This is not osmosis because semi-permeability are not present. For example, gases, water, oxygen, that will be moved directly if the inside will be less, so toward the osmotic gradients, not against the osmotic gradient rather than the using of the ATP. So here is the facilitate diffusion require the channel for move through aquaporin channel, for example water move, but the co-transporter is also present. In this co-transporter mean, for example, the albumin will bond with the water will move into the cell, and that is why the albumin is very important and crucial for homeostasis. So remember, so inside the potassium will be high and sodium will be less. So in this way the sodium should be move inside but against the osmotic gradient by the using of ATP is the possibility for move sodium out. So the movement of molecule from area of higher concentration to lower concentration simply is known as diffusion. Well, let's begin to understand the osmosis. The diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane from an area of higher concentration to area of lower concentration, it means it is against the osmotic gradients, is called osmosis. So let's begin to understand. Here is the water will be more in the extracellular matrix, but the intracellular water is less. So in this way the semi-permeability will be required. So the aquaporin channel will require for movement of the water into the cell. Why? Because the aquaporin channel when open, so the diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane, the aquaporin channel open when the concentration of water will be less into the cell, so the water can move into the cell for homeostasis and normal function, because the normal function required the normal water for normal physiology in the cell. So that is important, and cell physiology requires water, remember. So what is tonicity? Tonicity is the type of homeostasis in the relative concentration of solute in the water inside and outside the cell is called tonicity. Basically inside and outside. So remember, inside and outside balance will be created through that is known as a tonicity. So tonicity is basically the hypertonic environment, isotonic and hypotonic environment required. In this way it will be isotonic should be for the normal homeostasis. So let's begin to understand the filtration first. So the filtration is basically a different thing. In this way the water will be filtered, ion will be filtered, So intracellular filtration and extracellular filtration required for the homeostasis, remember. So this is the filtration. This filtration is the hydrostatic pressure exert force to the membrane of the cell, and large protein molecule not move, which smaller can move. So remember, when the hydrostatic pressure will be exerted, in this way the channel will be open, which that will be available for move outflux of the content, for example ions. When for example the sodium will be move out and potassium will be move out, in this way the water will be followed to move out because the solute will be high in the extracellular matrix. So in this way here the which is the cell for extracellular filtration and glomerular filtration, that is the separate things, because the extracellular filtration means the glomerular filtration filter the glucose, albumin, salts, acid, amino acid, water, and when large will be inhibit but the smaller will be filtered. So that is different. We are going to understand the diffusion and transport of ions within the cell, remember. And let's here you can see this is the hydrostatic pressure will be exert force for, and this exert force will give the signal to open the channel for move out the protein, and protein the water will be followed to the protein when the hydrostatic pressure will be increased due to the water concentration will be more. So remember one more important things, why water will should be move out, because water is excessive water will not work with the ion. So water balance is very important. Let's begin to understand the exchange ions against the osmotic gradient, that is known as active transport. So I am recapping again the active transport and passive transport. So first of all we should discuss about the primary active transport against the osmotic gradients. By the using of ATP, a single molecule is transported. Ions, sodium, potassium, calcium are transported across the cell membrane via semi-permeable membrane, but against the osmotic gradient. What that means against the osmotic gradient? Osmotic gradients against the osmotic gradients mean, for example, inside the cell, the concentration of sodium will be less, but the sodium is move out, not move in. Why? Because the sodium move out due to the ATP expenditure of ATP. So expenditure of ATP, for example, potassium is higher into the cell, but the potassium will also move from lower concentration to higher concentration through ATP use. So sodium will be less, but sodium will be move out rather than move in. So require the ATP. For example, this mechanism occur in the nerve impulse for exchange of ion, that is known as active transport. But in this case, this opposite manner we will discuss. So the passive transport will not require energy and it will move toward the osmotic gradients. So these things you should need to remember. For example, here is the proton will be move out, and for example acidity are present inside the cell is less, but the proton will move out and potassium will be move inside through ATP use. So in this way the nerve impulse is very important. Electrochemical potential will be created through against the osmotic gradients, the active transport. So let's begin to understand the simple transport. That was the co-transport in the diffusion step we are discussing with the protein binding transport, but this is the extracellular ion and we are going to understand the simple transport. In this way, for example, the hyperglycemia will lead to move into the cell the glucose, so the blood vessel and glut channel required. So here is you can see the glucose will move into through a sodium, one molecule of sodium will move into the cell with the glucose will move inside is known as import, but ATP is also required for opening of the channel. Opening of the channel means the insulin required. So insulin will be bound. So remember, insulin will be bound. The glut channel will be attached with the cell. So that is why it is also the ATP required. But this passively ATP required, not actively. So here is the sodium. 3 sodium will be moved out, while the inside is the sodium will be less, but against the osmotic gradient, it move out, because the sodium will when move inside through a sym port will should be move out. So the calcium will also move out to colloid influx, and in this way the acidity decreasing, so the proton can be move out for decreasing of the acidity. That is known as the sym port transport with the other ion, so the coupled transportation. So here the simple transport, what is this? The transport of a solute in the direction of its increasing the electrochemical potential, coupled to facilitate diffusion of a second solute, usually ion, in the direction of its decreasing electrochemical potential. So let's begin to understand with summary. We will discuss this is the type, and this is working why the diffusion and transport of ions is so important, because the hypertonic environment to isotonic environment and isotonic environment to when again the hypotonic environment will lead to again osmosis through isotonic and hypertonic to isotonic. That's function, and this feedback loop will be occurring in this way. For example, inside the sodium concentration will be more, so the sodium will move outside from hypertonic condition to the isotonic environment creation in within the cell, and out of the cell extracellular hypotonic and isotonic environment creation. So in this way the homeostasis in cell, why homeostasis in the cell? Because normal function with the balanced water, balanced ions, balanced sodium, potassium. So that is why the protection of internal environment from the harm of fluctuation in external environment is termed as homeostasis, because the protection. So this is the protection, because the when excessive water will be filled in the cell, so the cell should be lysis. So prevention of this, the water move out through a aquaporin channel for isotonic condition rather than the hypertonic condition. So thanks for watching. Please make sure to subscribe, like and share, give the comment and give feedback.